Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Lugo's Journey podcast. Today, I have on with me the author of The Rebel's Bible, Discovering the Strength to Go Your Own Way, Eugene Vassilas. Welcome.
Thanks, Nick. Hi, everybody.
So, first, explain to everybody, what is the Rebel's Bible? What are you all about? Explain.
Well, I think those are intertwined questions, but they point to my experiences in life. So basically, years ago, I was hit by a drunk driver on the highway at high speeds. My car was totaled. My life flashed in front of my eyes. I saw the end. And after that, I got a second chance and I had to make some quite serious introspection. Like I had a lot of questions all of a sudden, a lot of pain and no answers. So for a few years while I dealt with like my back and my neck, I also had a ton to think about too, which is like, how do you not squander a second chance? And if I look into what my life had been before that, it was, I was doing some things and they're working out well. Other places, I was afraid to speak. I was afraid to follow my life path. I didn't know what my life path was. I thought that I should be a corporate lawyer because my dad like celebrated that. And really, I'm not sure I really cared about law, but I was so obsessed on this one track, business law, business law. I know that's two tracks, but it was just like, I got to be corporate. I got to be successful. I got to be this guy. And then suddenly all that was ripped from me. Everything I knew about who I am kind of vanished. And apparently if you confront your mortality, which we all have to do at a certain point,
Yeah,
you got some big questions to answer. So
interesting.
yeah,
Yeah. So, did you
that's
find
the
that?
kickoff.
So in your entire introspective journey, what was the thing that really tipped it off, right? Were you sort of saying, you know what, I don't want to be an ordinary person, right? So there's a quote by Tony Robbins that actually sort of, I guess, broke me from that sort of, I guess we'll call it self-enslavement. That's the term that you'd like to use. This sort of self-enslavement, which was like, why live his quote was, why live an ordinary life when you can live an extraordinary one? And that sort of resonated with me because, I'm like, maybe I do want to live an extraordinary
Well, it's a great quote and it's a great idea. But if we look around the world, like most people are living not um, they're not living extraordinary lives. They're living so-so lives, like good enough, getting through the day, getting up, doing the shuffle, getting home. They're doing their best. So extraordinary implies that you are the exception. Like in order to be exceptional, you have to be the exception.
life. Hmm.
So to back up Tony's idea and to dive deeper into this, it's kind of like what needs to happen for you to be exceptional? Because that's where it all starts. That's where you begin to look at the programming. You're willing to take a risk. You're willing to speak. You're willing to stop people pleasing. You're willing to start thinking on your own, to do the hard work, to develop your ideas, your thoughts, to go against the grain when people will critique you and punish you and exclude you. You're willing to do all that because you don't have another choice.
Yeah.
And
So
that's the
where do
deal
you,
with rebels.
mm. So where do you sort of toe the line, right? You toe the line between the the outcast who doesn't really have any sort of, I guess, grounding in. There's a difference between a rebel and someone who's just kind of like an outcast, right? So how do you sort of toe that line and be someone who's actually impactful but also is a rebel?
So, dude, I interviewed a ton of people to figure out what the hell a rebel was. Who are they? What do they look like? What do they do, etc. And the answers I got revealed that nobody has any idea. Some people said it's somebody who does hard things. It's another person said who who fights for circumstances when they're not in the favor of what's right. Another person said, oh, it's when you listen to your own judgments and you follow those. Another person said it's somebody who wants to see the world burn. So after
Mm.
that, I was like, fuck this. Like, I'm going to make my own definition. And then I spoke to somebody who said, A rebel is not so much a person as it is an archetype. It's like this human type of character traits and personality type um, that does hard stuff. Somebody who
Yeah.
does hard stuff.
Well, that's my thing. So, I mean, this podcast is called the Lugo's Journey podcast for a reason. It goes off the archetype of the hero's journey. Everybody in their own life could be a hero. And I truly believe that, right? If you imagine, you look at heroes in every single story, and even if, we're having a conversation and I ask you to tell me your life story, you're a hero in your own story, right? Because you decided to break away from the mold and become responsible and do some things that allowed you to, we'll say, self-actualize, right, in a psychological sense, but more of just becoming your own person, right? So that's an archetype in and of itself, right? Like the whole purpose of becoming your own person, becoming your own hero, and actually becoming into yourself.
There's a lot there. I mean, what you just described touches on like the reason we exist. It reflects the plight of humanity and everyone, whether you call them hero, because then we could look at like what exactly a hero is,
Yeah.
or just the protagonist of their story. Like we're all self-centered in the sense that we have to identify with like the information that's coming in through our sensory system and then make sense of that and then have some sort of personality or self that emerges out. Like
Yeah.
there's no way to divide ourselves from that story.
Yeah, and exactly. And it's like, you know what? I find that so many people, you know, I think that's the whole purpose of the hero, I guess, because the first stage, if you think about it, right, in every story, and this is true in our own lives too, right? There needs to be a death of the father, right? Like you think about every superhero ever, right? It's like Superman, he has to leave his home and he has to go out on himself on his own path. You have Spider-Man, his dad dies. You have Lion King, his dad dies, right? You have all these sort of initiation trials which allow for someone to become their own person, right? To become a rebel, to become their own independent person because they have that sort of actual or symbolic death of their father, right? To be like, you know what? Now I'm my own person, right? So what do you find is do you find that this sort of what do you find sort of pushes people to be more independent and be sort of like a rebel?
So uh, the simplest answer is strife. It's challenge, it's oppression, it's resistance, it's friction.
Mm,
if if you grow up in a comfortable household and you have everything served to you on a platter and your bills are paid and there's food in your fridge and eventually in your stomach, you really have no reason to want for things. You have no reason to be hungry. You have no reason to get off the couch, really. So there is a function of our human needs, our need for autonomy, sovereignty, and when that's taken away or that's encroached on, like it's almost built into, I'd like to say it's built into the hero's journey to seize that back.
yeah.
So all of those figures you just described, which are leveraged for Disney stories or for Hollywood, there is some friction there. And some people get the friction later in life. Some people ignore the friction whenever it comes. And at the end of their life, on their deathbed, they sit there and they reflect on what they just did with their however many years, and they go to the grave with regret. So, dude, there are a lot of people living, and I know because I worked in a retirement home, and I talked to a lot of these people. When I was 12, 13, my parents dropped me off. They said, here, spend the summer, work for a retirement home. And the talks that I had with old people were revelatory. Like I would say majority of those people in that retirement home, and again, this is just a sample, but um, they were they were, oh shit, I'm gonna die. They feared mortality. They hadn't lived their entire lives, and on top of that, I mean, they only knew that they had a few years left.
Do you have any
So,
particular stories that really stood out?
um, well, I remember a conversation I had with a guy named Steve. And Steve, I asked Steve early on, I was like, Steve, this was about relationships. Steve, what is the biggest thing that you've learned about relationships in your 90 years? And
Mm,
he said, sacrifice. He's like, a relationship is at least 50% sacrifice. So be willing to give up all of your tightly held ideals.
interesting.
So I thought that was interesting. I also, from other people, like there was a person who had broken legs, and I think I wrote about this in the book. I don't remember the precise details, but I remember the essence of the story was that they broke their legs, and then they said, like, really appreciate the fact that you can move. And that,
Mm,
every day, and at the time, I took for granted the process of walking. There's another person who was an artist who couldn't see anymore, or just old people's vision.
yeah.
She couldn't do what she loved. Do what you love while you still have your eyesight. Like,
Wow.
and this eventually really hit home because, with a second chance at life and like facing my death, and then, um, bro, there was a lot of what am I going to do with the second chance? And the
Yeah.
bottom line is not squander it. Like, listen to the fear, because I think fear dictates human life. Listen to fear and befriend it. And I've got stories and experiences on that. But ultimately, make sure you're chasing failure, because by that your default is going to be success.
No, it's true because then you learn from those failures. So actually, I'm very interested in. So you had this sort of near death experience. Can you explain to us, sort of like your story of what was your life like before that? And then what exactly happened to transform you, like inside of yourself? What was sort of that sort of like rebirth, that sort of transformation that happened inside of you?
So high school, not to toot my own horn, but high school, I thought I was something of like the golden boy. I was going
Yeah.
to a good university. I was running a few small businesses. I was popular with the ladies. I just had a great life, and I had really worked to cultivate that. And, I thought, again, I was on this track, I was going to be a super successful business person. I was just going to crush it, make tons of money. I had this vision of myself driving in a red, I think I saw a commercial of this when I was like 8, and I never forgot it. Driving in like a red Porsche or Ferrari with a beautiful woman next to me, looking out on the undulating hills and just thinking like, I fucking made it.
Yeah, that's the
And
dream.
well, is it the dream, or is it a postcard, or is it a
It's
commercial?
it's like the James Bond dream. It's like the
It's Yeah, it's a
yeah.
commercial. It's like a Hollywood production. Like I know a few people's lives who actually look like that, and mine has looked different versions of that. And then as soon as I dig into that idea, I realize that all the things I held precious about that scene, what it looked like in my version, had nothing to do with money or nothing to do with the scenery. It had to do with an internal sensation that I was experiencing. And if I was with somebody else, then sharing that. So it's
Mhm.
like, we're getting a ton of constructs from media, from society, from culture, whatever. And part of the rebel's plight is sniffing out the BS, because most of it is BS.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. So how did you end up moving from some sort of like, our life is built off of external validation, external status, and, money is just the most dr- drivable external factor available. So where did your mindset just sort of shift?
So in retrospect, I had the benefit of the car accident, because that was
Yes,
like a clean
definitely.
end of chapter. End of chapter. You think you know what's up? Okay, cool. Now deal with intense bodily pain and deal with court trials, because the dude was
Mm,
drunk and like I was in court with him all the time. Deal with the psychological challenges that come with facing death at a young age. Deal with the um, a few months later having your best friend die. Like what
wow.
really set all of this off was that I was in this experience. I managed it. I survived it. Obviously, I was going to physical therapy, and I just kind of went on with life. Like I was a bit unstable, and I had all this pain in my body, but I was managing it. I was getting through it, and then I couldn't talk to my friends about it. My high school, college friends, they had no idea. They empathized, but they had no idea. My parents, they would never understand the magnitude of this. So like fundamentally, I sat with this alone and I just like brushed it under the rug like a good person, maybe a good typical man does, and just yeah. But then one of my besties, um, he got into an accident and died.
Oh
And
wow.
I remember I went to his open casket funeral and I saw his lifeless body there, full of makeup, and like that wasn't the guy I knew. But as I looked at him, like all of my own inner shit that had been under the rug suddenly came up. Mortality, relationship with my family, what I was doing in this world, who I was supposed to be, all the programming, and that's when chaos struck.
Yeah.
You know, it's it's a lot to reckon. Human beings are always in process. We're always processing. We're always evolving. I think growth is the function of the human being, and you know this because you see that like from a child until old age, humans grow and then they die, and that's all fair. But grow, like how you relate to that chaos, was something I had no idea how to handle. I think humans, I'll just speak for myself at the time, I was totally under resourced, didn't have the skills, didn't know how. I could have easily just turned to drinking or to partying or to whatever to numb. Like or in today's terms, I could have turned to social media.
Yeah.
Scrolling, I could have, going to college, I could have turned to mechanical sex. Just like, achievement orientation, robotic mindlessness.
Just running away
So
from your problems. Yeah, I could see it.
it's the bet, but like to give people power, like where they deserve it, avoidance is a great strategy to start with. If you have no other better resource, avoidance is just kind of built in.
Yeah. So
But at some
what did
point,
so
yeah.
when you actually faced your mortality, right? Was that the thing that sort of made you be like, you know what, I cannot avoid this situation any longer?
It was actually, so the mortality thing set me, like it was the clean cut, it was a new chapter, and it
Mhm.
was the sitting with myself every day. It was the not being able, it was the ambiguity and uncertainty and chaos and pain and confusion that came from not being able to go back to that old me, but
Mhm.
not having the new me formed. And I knew this new me was gonna, I had to figure this out, right? Been like super achiever my entire life. I knew it was going to fucking get there, but I didn't know where the there was. I didn't have anybody to tell me or prescribe what the there should be because I wasn't going to be a lawyer and several other things.
Yeah.
So, so it was actually, to answer your question, it was the daily monotonous mind fuck of being like uncomfortable being in my own skin. It was
Mhm.
like also reflecting on the old me and realizing the old me fucking sucked. Old me was a people pleaser. Old me was constantly running from deadline to deadline. Old me gave 150% because I thought that's what I was supposed to do. Old me was like listening to authority but pushing against authority and like all this fucking noise. And I knew I
Interesting.
couldn't do that with a second chance.
So there's this psychological concept, or yeah, I would call it a psychological concept. It's the moment when you find yourself. Like when I say yourself, it's the part of you that isn't influenced by any sort of outside factors. So when you remove the ego, right? The ego is the part of you that wants to please people, wants to be external, and then there's the part of you that underneath that just is you, right? The authentic part of you. Do you have any specific moment where you said, "Holy crap, I have found myself. This is the moment."
So, bro, with full honoring of that, like that's in my universe, like that borders on pop culture. And some of the people that I've studied with, they push back hard on that idea that there is a self. And instead, they offer the idea that you're always in process, you're always in development. So for you to say that, oh, Eureka, I found this self, is to look at the self as a fixed thing. And the
Hmm.
self, in my understanding, is the farthest thing from fixed. I mean, if you could pay attention to the, the tiniest of details that change, in you, but also in how you look, for example. Jump on YouTube, look at one of those videos. I took a picture of myself every day for 7 years. Look at how I changed. Like the human being, we're not, we don't notice subtle changes mostly. So we don't
No.
see how we're changing. So the point is that I don't think there's a particular self. I think there were points where it was like just a jagged path. It was like a jagged path of plateau, surge, plateau, surge. Sometimes it was more comfortable than others.
Interesting. Interesting. So you believe that you're never going to truly able to find any sort of self. It's just a constant growth process.
Well, so it's I mean it's a great point because like yeah, even like dude, music and people's like, oh, find your true self, be your best self, and all of that. And like in full disclosure, I've got days where I'm on top of the world and days where I'm like just kind of okay, and days where I'm not okay. And like society doesn't celebrate that. People like will text you all the time and like, oh, hey, haven't talked in a while. Are you happy? It's like, do you really
Yeah.
want to get into the nuances of happiness right now with me on this fucking email? And the truth is that, yeah, I just think it's an ongoing, messy, fun, creative process. So I'm not even looking anymore for the finding myself. I went around the world for almost 7 years, dude, and I like studied it with the so-called co-founders of the biggest self-development movements, and I had this wild journey which I can talk to you about, but
Yeah. Wow.
only to realize there's no way out. Like there's no self, it's just you today. And you being okay with you today, you can get to tomorrow. And after tomorrow, you put the next step forward, you go to bed, you get up the next day.
Interesting. Interesting. So yeah, definitely tell me about 7 years. What happened in this 7 years? What Tell me all the stories, all the stops.
Well, that would make this podcast 100 hours. So I'll give you the cliff notes. I, I was pretty fucked up. I was still in the States. I looked around and I thought, I was kind of depressed. I was confused. And I looked around and I thought, if I don't do something about this, I will have wasted my second chance. And I don't know where I'll be or how much longer I'll be here. So I essentially thought, if I if I don't have any answers, who does? Who
Yeah.
who does? And then I saw then I found this seminar where there was going to be the co-founder of NLP there, a co-developer. And at the time I was curious about NLP because I'd seen all these stories about like people being able to like work with their mind to overcome pain and to get
Yeah.
like onto this next thing that they called success. And I was just desperate. People are like, oh, what are you just like ditching all of your college plans and your X, Y, and Z plans and whatever? I was like, no, but I'm really desperate.
Yeah.
And this was the greatest competency I had, was just to go find those people.
Interesting. And for
So
everyone who doesn't know, NLP is neuro-linguistic programming, which was the thing that made
right,
Tony Robbins famous. That was what sort of,
yeah,
pushed him up to the
yeah,
top.
yeah. So NLP, by the way, has a ton of positives. It's got a ton of bad press as well. So what I essentially did is like I want to find out for myself, and I offer everybody the same idea. Go look for the tools to give you what you need. You probably won't hit it gold the first time you do it. You'll have to keep searching, but essentially keep looking until you find something that gives you enough breath to keep going. And
Yeah.
that's like NLP was great. I'm a trainer in NLP. I support it to the end of my days. But that was just the first thing I've learned. Like since then, I lean on constellation work. I lean on hypnotic work. I lean on the change you can do with your subconscious and with trance and hypnosis. Like ton of tools.
Wow. So, oh, I'm sorry.
That's a great. That was a great silent sneeze. I don't know how you
Yeah,
did that. That was,
I put
so you
myself
were
on mute.
that was fast. Wow.
I was like, I don't want to sneeze on camera, so I gave you a nice little mute.
That was great.
But no, so so throughout your 7 years, how did you go from something from, I agree, neurolinguistic programming is something that uh, it says, change can happen in an instant and it sort of reprograms your subconscious mind. How did that sort of change from this to hypnosis, right? And constellation work? What sort of change there?
And a million other things too, dude. I followed my
Wow.
nose. I went to Brazil. I met some gurus here and there, and I just kept talking to people and meeting people and listening and finding out where did this like inner intuitive sense want to go. Oftentimes it made no sense. For example, after my first stint in Brazil, I went back to the States, and my parents were like, dude, what are you doing? Like, cut the shit, get back here. And like it was so hard to be like I would love to, and I even interviewed at some hedge funds and like proceeded with that, and yet there was this part that's like you can't do that and still like yourself. Like you have to give up on that dream in order to find out what's really true.
Yeah. So
So
how did you oh no, keep going, keep going.
then I went back to South America. I ended up studying with shaman in the middle of the woods. I ended up getting into body work. I ended up um, do the things that I've seen about like esoteric practices, not that I necessarily do them in my life, but I'll give you a story. One time I'm in Brazil, I'm with a group of friends. One of them is one of Brazil's most um, foremost constellators. He does incredible work and he has a past as a shaman, like just a
Mm,
fucking powerhouse. Anyway, he and some of his friends and we traveled to the north of Brazil into the woods. On the way there, I sit with this dude in the back of the car for 15 hours, talking normal chats, all good, life stories, whatever.
yeah.
When we go to the place where there's a ceremony being held, he does some sort of um, religious hypnotic cantation. And when I see him next, he has transformed into an 80-year-old spirit in his young body.
What?
And I obviously didn't believe it at first. I'm like, yeah, he's full of shit, whatever. Dude, there are certain things you can't change consciously. For example, the tonus in his face had shifted, and we don't control the subtle muscles in our face consciously. His spinal curve had changed so that it was now like leaning out to the back like an old man would. His voice tone had shifted completely. His mimics, like the gestures he did with his face, also changed. And dude, after that, after I saw that, I was like, there's a lot of extra stuff here that I don't understand. So,
Wow.
um, but to be fair, I also spent a long time in Europe. Uh, I've got friends who are executives of big companies. I spent a lot of time with a blue shirt on and like sitting in boardrooms and listening and learning and observing and helping and talking and all of that. I was executive myself years later in Manhattan. I learned a ton there too. Super deadlines, time management, get to it, make a lot of money. Like, I know that world also.
So here's a
So,
big question. So who lives the better life, right? Like in some way that you feel like you're able to quantify it or judge, right? Or compare the two, right? The excessively spiritual life versus the excessively deadline driven life, the fully conscious life that we sort of live here in our deadline driven world in the United States. Who lives the better life?
dude, so better is a form of judgment that I can't place on something as big a mystery as life. Like
Mm,
that's reductionist and simplistic. Like the truth is, life is the biggest fucking mystery there ever was and ever will be. And my idea is that you have to pull both. If you end up, for example, being the business person at the end of your years, I've met tons of super successful materialist people. The thing is, you still die missing something.
yeah.
At the same time, I've met a ton of spiritually enlightened people who, or if you want to call them that, who they can't balance their checkbook, and maybe they don't need to. Now you could argue each one. But my premise is that you don't need to be one dimensional. You don't need to be only spiritual. You don't need to be only a business person or a professional. And I think it's actually the sign of a mature psyche and heart to develop both.
Yeah.
Like, how could you live an enriching life without both? I mean, you oftentimes see people who get stuck on the one dimension. Like again, like the Hollywood producer who's got the car and like tons of money, but is on his fifth wife and is like trying to figure out how to avoid the next lawsuit or whatever. You've got, I'm in Bali. There are tons of super spiritual, like guru, whatever people here wearing the clothes, talking the talk. And bro, I wouldn't ask them to do a project with me. Like they just don't have the practical grounded savvy sometimes.
Yeah.
So I think it's everybody's responsibility to develop both.
Well, there's
And
a
not,
there's
and when,
a there's a part of the hero. So part of the hero archetype is the archetype of the master of two worlds, right? So the person who could sort of go into the spiritual realm, but also can make it through the conscious realm, through the deadline driven realm that we have in the United States. And do you find that that's important, right? Do you find that you're sort of like not like a prophet, but sort of a you're a leader, you're a coach in sort of showing people the spiritual aspect, because you find that in America that we focus too much, or some people focus too much on that sort of overly conscious, overly goal driven, ego focused life, and should focus a little bit more on the spiritual.
so bro, let me also talk to the idea of ego, because ego
Yeah.
is a fundamental survival mechanism to keep you afloat as a psyche and as a human being amongst other human beings. So the ego's like, I tip my hat to the ego. I have one, I honor it. And I think without it, I'd probably be a super wounded pile of defeat.
Why?
So like if you look, for example, at the great salespeople have two fundamental things. First, they have the capacity to give deep empathy. They're highly empathetic. They understand the human plight. They talk to you. The second thing, though, is they've got healthy egos, not arrogant egos, healthy egos, which is essentially their ability to take rejection, to deal with things when they're hard, and to get down to business. And when somebody, for example, who's in the problem state, is like, oh no, I don't have the money or the time or the this or the that, they're like, hey, I hear that, but you need this.
Yeah.
So it's actually like, I honor both of those. So now back to your other question. I it's amazing, bro, because like traveling all of these years and like practicing different languages and like getting into different viewpoints on cultures, I've just seen that there's no right or wrong answer here. It's like flavors of ice cream. Like, you can maybe you like blueberry, somebody else likes banana, whatever the case is, but you kind of have to decide for yourself. Like some people don't even like ice cream. And
Yeah.
what that means tangibly is there are pockets of people in Manhattan who are super spiritual, and literally in the building next door, you've got like some of the strongest corporates in the most luxurious lawyer offices with 50-foot tables that were had to be flown in by helicopters because they had to be made part of the fixture, if that made
Yeah.
sense. So yeah,
So
it's
let me
both, man.
challenge you on that a little bit. So do you think there's any wrong way of living, right? Because there are all these flavors, right? And people could take so many different routes, but at the same time, is there any way that sort of that people live the wrong way, or they end up living with regret?
In what context?
So
You gotta
for
look at
example,
context there, dude.
right, somebody who is living in America, right, and they find that um they never got in touch with themselves, right? They were always too self-centered. They were too egocentric. And then I'm sure because you worked in a retirement home that you experienced maybe a little bit of this. People who fill themselves up with regret because they're like, you know what? I never developed the right relationships. I was on my fifth wife. I never really found, that sort of internal happiness. Is that sort of a wrong way of living, or is that just another flavor of the ice cream?
So it depends on context because if, for example, you believe in reincarnation, then you
Mm,
need to eat shit for this lifetime so you can do it better next lifetime. If you don't believe in that, then you can still like shrink the timeline and just look at this lifetime and decide that, hey, actually, I need the not only regret, dude, I need the guilt, I need the shame, I need the pain, I need all the bad things that happened to spur growth. to like, yeah, if I didn't have the accident at that age, plus a number of other things that went sideways, I wouldn't have walked this path. Like this part of this path is like self-curative,
Yeah.
but everybody has a version of this. Everybody's got stuff that goes off or like, and I've met every flavor along the way. And the thing is, yeah, I think if you were to say that I want to avoid regret, then maybe you're looking at the like what part of your life are you looking at? Because if you zoom out, if you like lift up from, you're looking at your life as like a Hollywood film. Like it's on
Hmm.
like those old films that used to put in the cameras. And if you're like super myopic and focused on that one scene, well, it may not make sense in the gestalt of your entire life. So it's about zooming out and looking at, oh, I have this regret, which came from something I didn't do when I know I should have done it. So now, to avoid the regret, I'm going to live differently. And maybe you get to 90 and you realize, shit, it's too late. That's a problem a
Yeah.
lot of people have.
Well, that's what I find is something that's incredibly, that's incredibly relevant because, the financial incentive is something that, that we can't really ignore in this situation, right? Like, imagine, man, so what was it that allowed you to live 7 years? Like you could have been in a hedge fund, right? You could have been making all this money, right? So what was it that sort of made you say, you know what, screw the financial implications. I'm going to go out and I'm going to go see the world.
Values. Bottom line is values. I went to two business schools, and a majority of my friends are business people. They're on Wall Street, they're in big companies, they own their own firms, whatever. And bro, I always checked in with them. I believe in building community and connection. I
Yeah.
always checked in with them wherever I was in the world. And I always was like, they have all those things that I thought I wanted, but they're no happier. They're no happier. And so I realized in perhaps retrospect that one of my leading life values was having an interesting and meaningful life, which meant oftentimes foregoing incredible amounts of wealth early on so that I could have the intellectual and time freedom to go to these remote parts of the world. Dude, I lived in China, I've lived in India, I've been all over Europe, I've been to remote parts of South America, and got friends everywhere. And some of
Wow.
my own friends in the US who followed the business path, their lives looked totally different. But we were united in college, and then they're always like, "Oh, that's crazy, Eugene, just going off." And so sometimes I had to explain, like, "Hey, there's this bigger like answer I'm trying to figure out, which comes from my brush with death and blah blah blah, and like my cosmic figuring out where I am on the planet and like 7.5 billion people and do I matter and stars and all sorts of shit." They couldn't understand that, and they didn't need to, because
Yeah.
their 16 hours a day, to answer one of your other points, was that they were too busy to think about that. They were in survival mode in a very different way. If you're earning 150K, like your first year out of college, working at a high performance place or whatever, they're going to grill you to the ground most likely.
True.
So they were in survival mode.
So did you find that in your entire process, your entire journey, did you find your individual meaning in life, right? So now that you sort of the mythological framework of this is you transcended the normal consciousness. You transcended the survival consciousness and sort of pushed upwards, right? So did you find that there was a specific meaning in life that you had that sort of was unique to you?
There are a lot of questions mixed into that. So
True.
meaning is highly individual.
Yeah.
It depends on the person. It also depends on the moment. For example, the things that I value today, which give my life meaning, are not the things I necessarily valued a decade ago. And the things that I'll value, for example, when I've got a family, I won't value, going to dance. I'm taking Latin dance right now. Like, will that be a priority then? Will that give me meaning? Maybe not. So I think meaning is geared for adaptation. It's like a behavior, or it's connected to behavior, which is supposed to give us some sort of essence, like, life's working out. This feels good. This feels fulfilling. And fulfillment is, again, a function of your needs. It's a function of maybe even your, I'm really hesitant even saying this, your soul's destiny. Like, yeah, maybe I've got this pre-written purpose that I'm here for. If you believe in destiny, a lot of people don't, and I fully honor that perspective too. Um, I've got a tune in my head that I need to sing. You know, there's a quote I like that's like, a bird doesn't sing because it has answers. It sings because it has a song.
Mhm.
And, you know, I've got a song inside. So do you. So does everybody. Got a song, got to get it out. Self-expression is oftentimes a meaningful value. It's a meaningful pursuit of life. What am I going to do with this, like, this period of years that I'm like stuffed into a society on this planet, and I'm shuffling around mostly unconscious and figuring out, like, between my trips to the mall and, you know, when I'm single, my pursuit of dating, and later when I develop into a family and become an old person, like, get safety and security and retirement and love. Like, there are all these milestones that we have to check, but there's a billion moments for ambiguity and interest in between that.
Interesting. So for a rebel like you, right? For someone who has created literally the Rebel's Bible, do you find that so you're one of the terms that you like to use is self-enslavement, right? So what could people do to avoid that self-enslavement that comes with maybe following society or just following, nothing that actually ends up driving themselves?
Listen to your intuition. Like, inside everybody, there's some sort of either kinesthetic experience or an internal monologue. Like, somebody says or does something, and a part of you is like, what the fuck? Like, there's that. That's a voice you should listen to. Also for yourself. If you're like I was at one point, you would ignore that voice. You would keep doing the wrong thing until you get so many, until the universe gives you so many spankings. You're like, wait. But also, when I was talking about the kinesthetic response, listen to your body. Like, the body, you know, if you allow it to be that instrument, is not so much a temple. Like, oh, treat your body like a temple. It's more of a home, and you got to make your home comfortable. You got to learn how to feel comfortable there. And a lot of people, they numb and they drink and they smoke and they do whatever because it's uncomfortable to be with themselves. Well, figure out what it takes to be comfortable. Do
Yeah.
your yoga, do your meditation, take your breaths, do your breath work, um, get a massage, and learn to listen to the subtleties of the body because it's your greatest instrument. You don't have to you don't have to, like, I do a lot of speaking, I do a lot of talking, a lot of thinking. I live in the world of ideas. But I often have to leave the head and get back into the body because the body, to quote a famous book, keeps the score. Like, your body is so full of intelligence. It's where your traumas live. It's where your instinctual memories live, some might say. Scientists might debate that, but you get the point. Like,
Yeah.
tap into yourself is the bottom line.
Hmm. There's a lot to unpack there. So you're saying that sort of I guess what you're really fighting for in this case is just more consciousness, right? Like more awareness. And when you have people who I think a lot of people just sort of live their lives just not, you know, just constantly in the autopilot, right? Constantly just doing the same things over and over again, not really thinking about what to do next or, how to consciously live a better life or, what are my goals for this relationship that I have with my family or, with my work or what am I really striving for? So do you find that the answer is just more consciousness, more self-awareness, just more focusing on yourself?
So, to your point, most people live lives of default,
Yeah.
which is they're on the reaction end instead of action end. You got to inverse that, or invert that rather. In other words, you have to act. You have to become the driver of your own vehicle, the vehicle called life. You have to make your own decisions. If you're not making good decisions, then you have to first educate yourself on what a good decision is. Maybe you have to get models of what a good life is. I always refine my own definition. I mean, I can show you, I've kept journals, by the way, which is another great tool for the last almost 20 years.
Yeah,
And I
explain.
can I can track the cognitive evolution I've done over that time. I can track the inspiration in forms of people or stories or lifestyles that I've listened to and then adapted for my own purposes and implemented. For example, the nomadic lifestyle, I had that for a while, I don't know where I got the idea, but like I did it. Lived out of a suitcase, traveled the world, went to weird places, did sometimes questionable things in terms of took wild teas that brought me to hallucinating places, like sought answers. And I think everybody should have that right to treat life not as a fixed thing, not as a permanent thing, but as a discovery, as an unfolding thing. Back to the hero's journey, it's a journey for a reason. And like if I were to die tomorrow, God forbid I don't, but if I were, then the life that I've lived since my car accident has been one of questioning. And I don't know what more awareness is, but I know of just awareness reconfigured. So, for example, like the tendency of humanity is to have a myopic focus on these five things. I'm looking at my family, I'm looking at my business, I'm looking at my needs, I'm trying to avoid fear, I'm trying to pursue pleasure, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And great, that's a great starting focus. But then what if you were to add in contribution? What if you were to add in like spiritual development? What if you were to add in all these things? Then by definition, now it's in your awareness. And now you're just like, you're open to it. Same description of like, when you go to buy that new car and you're on your way to the dealership and you go to the dealership, you buy it. And on the way home, driving in that new car, you suddenly notice the make and model and color of that all over the road. Well, it's because before you weren't attuned, you weren't primed, you weren't looking for those things.
Yeah.
So by asking questions, aka what else is there? What else could this mean? What else am I here for? And looking at questions as part of the journey instead of answers. For all of the things that I think to be true about who I am today will probably be untrue in 5 to 10 years. I'm not leaning on my identity or my personality or whatever as a crutch. Every time I get too comfortable with like a sense of a thing I think about myself, I question it.
Interesting. So you have your own course, which is about self-leadership and teaching yourself. And a lot of what you're talking about here is, in my belief, I would, because when I use the word habit, I think habits is it's a weird word to use, but you've made it a habit. You've made it a unconscious programming of yours to constantly question, right? Every single day you are questioning, and that is something that now, right? It probably wasn't the fact for you in the past, but now every single day you make it a point to question. So how do you think that people should be able to implement this in their lives, and sort of instead of, I love that in your course, it's a self-leadership course. It's not a self-management course. And there's a big difference between the two, right? It's you're actually becoming the leader of yourself instead of just sort of, treating yourself as you're some sort of, I guess, employee, or lack of a better term, slave to yourself. So how do you find that people could sort of use that and sort of, implement that in your lives?
If if you don't decide what your life is going to look like, somebody else will. If you don't decide what your beliefs are, consciously or semi-consciously, somebody else will. If you don't take control over your own destiny, somebody else will. So again, looking for examples of people whose lifestyles inspire you. Look in books, look on video, look in courses, look in real life, look at your job, look at your boss, look at your lover, look at whomever. The clues are always there. It's really just putting yourself into a state of inquiry that allows you to begin to see the writing on the wall. So secondly, I would say don't believe all of your own juju. I've just given a ton of advice on this call. Probably most of it is horseshit, if we're being honest. Like, and it's just human. It's just the things I believe right now are like produce, like fresh produce. It smells good, would taste good as I'm eating it now, but if left unattended, unrefrigerated, and over a long enough time, it'll get rotten.
So
because
what's the remedy for that?
we're made for reinvention. I go to a gym here and I take classes, and there's literally a 68-year-old woman who has the vibe of and dresses like a 25-year-old. She's incredible. And I talked with her a bit, and she's just like, she for her, old age is not it's not a thing. It's like, it's not an eventuality. So she just treats herself young. So
Wow.
some other things to consider is managing your mental monologue. Like if you're, so I did this experiment years ago, which is where I put an alarm clock and it rang 3 times a day. And at each of those times, I recorded what I was thinking. And a majority of the time, it wasn't like exultant. It was kind of shitty. And I recorded the exact things that I said to myself. They weren't supportive or affirmative or whatever. It was like, oh, fuck this X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
So I had to learn how to check that. I had to learn how to put new ideas into my head that were more positive, affirmative. That comes with gratitude practices, meditation practices. Like you have to become a student of life.
Interesting. So do you find that in your own life now that you, after doing those, you know, gratitude practices and sort of, you know, getting out of that unconscious negative sort of programming that we're sort of going through our entire lives, do you find that do you find that constantly you're feeling sort of a little bit more elated, right? You're feeling a little bit more positive at every single moment.
Um, to be honest, I don't really remember who I was back then.
It's true.
I'm just
We don't
different now.
notice the slight changes. As you said,
I'm
we
also
don't
not
notice.
looking. I'm also not looking for elation. Like I think the pursuit of happiness is a valuable thing, but I think also life is made for joy and woe. I think you got to feel all the feels. And I think if you don't, well, then it comes out somewhere else in your life. So back to your point about habituation, dude, the human mind is made for generalization. Like your brain will naturally generalize. When you were young, you learned what a door handle was, and as a result, every time you walk up to a door since then, you don't have to relearn what a door handle is. So it's the same like thing about habits. It's both the thing that makes your life possible and that makes your life tough. So I think like anytime something becomes too familiar, too commonplace, too automatic, I have to pause and look at, well, what am I automating? Henry Ford, famous for creating some sort of industrialized automation process. Bro, automation is incredible if you've got all the right things in the right place. But if one thing is off, then you just duplicate your error. And I don't know about you, but my processes are never super refined. Like they're all good, they're all helpful, they're all effective. But I will never find the perfect process. And anybody who tells you they have is full of shit. Like you're dealing with the most complex thing there is, which is the human psyche cast upon the human experience. What the fuck?
True.
Like just
It's true. So how do you find that you sort of, so is it through journaling, or is there anything more that you find that you sort of, you could be a student of yourself, right? A student of, you know what, here's the person I was yesterday and I'm going to improve for tomorrow. How do you find that you do that consciously?
okay. Tangible things all in a row. One, get a journaling practice. Write down your thoughts. I do it every time, every night before I go to bed. When I'm going through shitty times, I journal multiple times a day. I take whatever's in my RAM and get it onto the hard drive, literally. I just don't want it in my cluttering space. So there's journaling. Second, get a yoga practice or a movement practice. Yoga, dance, martial arts, maybe all of them. Learn how your body is and how it moves through space. Become a friend of your body. Notice what you do like as out of habit, like how I'm holding my body right now with the arm over the chair and I'm leaning my weight to my right sit bone and whatever, like that's habituated for me. And I know actually what's even stronger is both feet on the floor, upright spine, shoulders back and down. That's symmetrical, that's powerful. But this habituated posture is comfortable for me. So here's an example of exactly how my body actually needs uprightness And because I'm patterned and comfortable, and this is even sociologically prescribed as like a masculine stance or whatever the fuck, like
Yeah.
I do it. Okay, so but get into yoga, dude. Align your body, align your mind, get into your breath. Take a breath work class. Um, I would say also do some sort of human development stuff. Anytime there's a big question in your life or a big transition, aka a divorce or a death or a bankruptcy or some sort of big thing that happens in your life, talk to somebody. Men are often afraid to do this. Women have much less of a problem and do it more naturally. Get a therapist, get a coach, get somebody to get the shit off your chest. You don't have all the answers. Stop pretending you do. Stop aiming to look cool. Like, I want to be cool as much as anybody else. I love the high school thing of like, being cool and whatever. But I also realize it's a wasted cause. If you've ever been
Yeah.
to a nightclub and you walk in and you can like see the people who, are posturing and like they're kind of looking around, they're trying to be fucking cool. Great. But then look at the person who's in the center of the dance floor wearing their shoes on their hands and, God knows what else, just getting wild.
Being
So another
themselves.
thing is, I mean, maybe that's herself, maybe it's something else. I don't know. But it's, yeah,
I see what you mean.
it's,
Yeah.
yeah. Like, don't take yourself seriously is the point. And that was a big, like, when you're in pain and when you're going through stuff, like the world feels heavy and crazy. Look for where it's light. Look for examples of people who live lightly.
Interesting.
Um,
Oh, can you take
yeah,
us through your journaling practice? So is it just, the same, you just write down your thoughts, or is it a little bit more structured?
I've experimented with both structured and unstructured. What it looks like today is it's a stream of consciousness, 15-minute process, sometimes shorter, sometimes longer, where the main focus is just to get the shit in my head out. And it's amazing. As soon as I write the thing or type it, it's as though the time that it takes for it to travel from a neurological impulse to my fingertips and get into the computer, the thoughts already changed. And so oftentimes reading it on the screen disassociates me from it. And I'm like, wow, did I literally just believe that? That's BS. Nope, nope, nope.
And it makes you
So it's just,
consciously think about it.
yeah, but it's also it's also just a dumping place. Like, hey, let me just get this out and be done with it. Like, I realize also majority of my thoughts aren't real. They're a function of my fears and my needs and my insecurities and my desires. Like, it's still very primitive. It's unconscious. It's like grimy and like, it's like Gollum. It's like Lord of the Rings, like, precious, like you're searching for precious.
Yeah.
So I'm like, all right, well, if precious is sometimes running the show, let's get precious out of here. So
Interesting.
15 minutes, stream of consciousness, dump it out. And then amazingly, once it's all out, then I construct what I'm going to do for the next day in a positive way. So I'm like, tomorrow I am going to experience the day in X, Y, and Z ways. So, and I write it in past tense. So something like, today's Tuesday, right? So Wednesday, I had incredible calls with all of my clients. I showed up inspired and full of life, and I offered ideas that were invigorating and that were life-changing. My clients took those ideas and put them into practice immediately. Then I ate healthy food that nourished my body. My workout was incredible. I reached a new PR, and I did a yoga session that stretched me out afterwards and left me feeling cool, calm, and collected. I went on a date with somebody at the end of the night. We got along famously. We really connected. We had delicious food. It just worked. I felt so good slipping into bed at the end of the night. And like, I wake up, I slept 8 hours. I wake up refreshed for the next day. Most of the time, that shit doesn't happen. Like, it doesn't happen exactly like that. But there's really something to setting the intention.
So do you find that your days are very structured where you have sort of like the same day after each other and you sort of do, okay, my calls are going to be in this time and I'm going to go out at this time? Or do you find that as someone who lives as sort of like a free spirit that you don't really have a structure, you're just sort of going with it?
So there's big structure and little structure. Big structure suggests that like, okay, I've got 7 days in a week and I work however many days, however many hours, and I do these things that need to get done in those time pockets. But
Hmm.
then like, let's say you've got 3 hours. You've got 3 hours of time that can have a bunch of little structures in there. Like, how do you spend an hour? How long can you work uninterruptedly? What are your needs as as a individual connected to your brain? Well, you've got physiological needs. I've got to drink water. I've got to eat food every 90 minutes. I got to get up. I've got to stretch. I got to do all this stuff. I'm now forgetting structure and building it around the life that I want. Um, and that sometimes it takes a lot of belief change, dude. Like a
Yeah,
lot of
yeah,
people, I think in your email you wrote that like I'm the type of person who works 16 hours a day or something like that.
around
Like
there.
there,
Yeah,
I know so many people like that, and that's great. But I think that's also a lazy way to be in the world.
explain.
16 hours. Are you like 16 hours? Are you, you're either masochistic, like there's no body that sustains 16 hours of continual work that's effective. Well, then I also think you're ineffective because Bill Gates, for example, takes 6-minute meetings. I used to have 60-minute meetings at my, as an executive. Like something is being lost in translation. So
Makes
at one,
sense.
I think, so 16-hour days should be swiped off the table. We should stop celebrating, hey, you're great because you work hard. Working hard, I think, is yeah, I think it's the last dinosaur of our modern culture. What I prescribe instead is figuring out what your best work life is like. Dude, after 90 minutes, after this type of intensity on a call, I'm gonna like relax after this. Now
Really.
I've learned how to relax faster, if that makes sense. What to do to like right my mind and my body and come back to center in like 15 minutes. But the point is still that if I don't get everything done today, there's tomorrow. And I have so many parallel interests, meaning I'm not just all work. I know tons of people who are so fucking rich and so successful, and you look at the rest of their life and they're boring as hell. They have terrible marriages, their kids don't know them, they've got no hobbies except buying cars or like God knows what. I'm not that guy. My ideal for a good human life is range. So I'm the dude who can talk spirit. I'm the dude who can do like business executive, corporate stuff. I'm the dude who knows how to Latin dance. I'm the dude who knows how to speak other languages and like leave my cultural framework and get into a different culture. I'm the dude who's like been a 25-year yogi. But at the same time, like yoga's good, but I've also done martial arts for a lot of my life. I'm gonna have my black belt before the end of my life, and I'm gonna do it with my son or my daughter, and I'm gonna create this incredible home life that's filled with love and care, and we're going to travel all over the world. Like, I'm just envisioning shit because I can, and so can you.
So none of it has to be, very rigid and structured. I personally, like, I work 16 hours a day, and I find that, yeah, sometimes I'm very ineffective. Sometimes I'm also, it gets frustrating. I completely agree, right? The 16-hour a day life, the workaholic life is like, I set rigid goals for myself. I try to get it done every single day, and usually I end up falling short because it's like, I assume, yeah, you know what? Tomorrow, today maybe I worked, let's say, today I worked X hours. Let's say I worked 10, whatever, 6 to 10 hours perfectly efficiently, doing it really well. But the other hours, you know what, I expect myself to be working incredibly efficiently. So I set these goals for myself, going 16 hours a day, and you know what, sometimes, most of the time, they don't end up working out. So what do you believe is sort of like the remedy?
Bro, like I say this with compassion and love, and I hope you receive it that way. Change the goal. Like, get rid of that goal. You're living. I mean, this is absurd for me to say because it's part of your journey, but like you're trying too hard, man. Like 16 hours, bless your soul and bless whoever taught you that 16 hours was somehow good. But now I'm going to tie this back to my coaching work. And, I've coached super high performers and executives and business leaders and Olympians and God knows what. And at the end of the day, the most similar problem is that people just don't believe they're worth it or that they're enough.
Hmm.
And I'm not saying that's the case here, but if you believe that you were deserving of a balanced life, of a life in which you had equal times for rest, for play, for work, and work was just a component, or work was a means to an end, you wouldn't allow yourself to do 16. You'd have some internal mechanism that was like, wait, what the fuck? I'm going to go out with so and so. I'm going to play and I'm going to stretch. like the stress that's on your body right now physiologically, I can't fathom after 16 hours.
Well, that's my thing, you
So
know. I find that there are some people, and I guess I would include myself in that realm that sort of, feels like they have a purpose, right? And if you have a goal, then it's like why do anything other than pursuing that goal? Sort of the existential question, I
hard
guess.
hard work. So hard work is celebrated in our society. And of course, if you're trying to get ahead of the pack and do your thing, like power to you, keep doing it. But it's always a term. Think holistically. Think in terms of everything has a cost, and you can only choose what price to pay. So you're either going to pay the price of all your foregone desires, thoughts, uh, childhood experiences, college life experiences, or whatever, in exchange for those extra 8 hours that you work beyond everybody. And you just have to answer, is that worth it for you? Maybe worth for you, maybe not worth for other people. I've also worked hard as hell in my life and know what it's like to, know sweat equity and all of that.
Yeah.
And it's great. But dude, it's great. Ask yourself, if Nick were the motherfucking man, he was just the ultra badass, and he was like taking names and kicking ass and like employing a team and doing whatever in his more evolved stages, would he be thinking of, I have to do 16-hour days? He would probably, yeah, I mean, again, he might think it were an embarrassment because your body is probably thinking that. Like like people who work to that degree, oftentimes they drop dead when they're 50 or sooner. They get some weird pathological or psychological thing happening with their body, cancer, God knows what else. And then they have the reckoning. Dude, then they have the intervention.
Yeah.
Don't be that person if you can help it. Like let these messages burrow their way into your mind. Like if you don't care for yourself now, you pay for it later. It's like most of modern medicine is it's not prescriptive, it's reactive. I forget what the word is. um but it's like you go to the doctor when you're sick, as opposed to, it's not preventative. That's what I want to
Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
preventative. Like you get a prescription because you didn't do preventative measures. I haven't been to the doctor in, I don't know, 6 years, knock on wood. Like I'm
Really?
caring,
Wow.
I care the shit out of myself, like in a fucking loving way.
Really? Wow.
That,
Wow. So
and
do
I,
you no, keep going, keep going.
dude,
You're on a roll.
fatigue happens naturally, right? Like you do a lot of work, you invest a lot of energy, and you need some recuperation time. But I don't like, literally, these ideas of a cold and that kind of shit. It's not even in my consciousness. Corona, congratulations. I know it exists out there. It's a terrible thing. It's not even in my fucking consciousness. My psyche is saying, nope, I'm not even entertaining that possibility. Sorry. I've got too
Wow.
much to do in the world.
Why? Honestly, like, it's something that everyone fears, right? And it's also, I think everybody has these sort of primal fears, right? Like, what is it that actually makes you think, you know what? I'm going to focus on myself. I'm not going to go to the doctor in 6 years, right? Like, what is it that makes you sort of have that internal drive, I guess?
Who the hell said you have to go to the doctor? Like if you go to the doctor when you're sick, and I do go to the dentist to clean but like the doctor, like why, like you even hear about it, like going to the sick house, or going to I mean, we use these like descriptive titles of like, I'm going to the hospital. In theory, that gives you hospice. What do you get at the hospital? You get a hospice. But there are plenty of other places where like you're going to a place where it's a collection of sick people. That's not the consciousness I'm looking for. Like those people
Mhm.
don't have the answers for me. Maybe the doctor studied a lot. He's probably an expert in medicine. I hope to God he or she is. And the doctor doesn't know my body. The doctor can prescribe ideas, but do you know the type of curative shit I've done with my mind? Like, do you know what I can do with the power of this and the power of suggestion? Do you know that, for example, numerous hypnotic studies, and you can even see this in a stage hypnotic show, a stage hypnotism show, is that like Somebody will come on, they'll be put into a light trance, they'll be told, for example, the hypnotist will blow smoke in their face, and they'll be told that in just a second, they're going to take that cigarette and they're going to put it out in their hand. And then the person is like, get ready. The person's still in a trance, eyes closed, whatever. And then instead of taking the cigarette, they replace it with a pencil eraser and they touch the pencil eraser to the hand. And bro, the body will create a scab as though if it were burned.
Really?
We don't
Wow.
even begin to understand the capacity of our subconscious and conscious minds unifying, what it can do for us. Most people are they think their conscious mind's in charge and they're doing like, they're running their lives. Bro, one of my mentors once told me, your entire life is unconsciously determined. The same force that right now is blinking your eyes, it's beating your blood, it's breathing your breaths, it's allowing you to maintain a blood temperature, a body temperature of somewhere in the high 90s. Dude, that's running the show. And you never have to ask it to do so. That same function is also running your thoughts and your fears and your like deeper stuff and your childhood stuff. And like, we're so out of control and we're out of our minds for thinking we're in control. So
So, no, keep
yeah,
going.
so to your point, get out. So be willfully out of control. That's my fucking message. Get out of control. And it's scary. It's so fucking frightening. But I guarantee I'm talking to a college audience. Some of you know what a foam party is. Some of you have been to a foam party and you know what happens in Cancun on spring break. The same idea is true. What do you believe is true at a foam party? People go, they get drunk, anything is possible. What if you were to take that same idea of foam partiness and apply it to the rest of your life? In other words, I can get done all the shit that I need to get done to be effective and move the needle in work. I can get it done in 3 hours. There's some people who do that, dude. Tim Ferriss wrote the 4 Hour Work Week. He's doing
Work week.
something different than a lot of people. Like, so anyway, like keep looking at your beliefs, keep looking at what do I believe about, what do I believe is true, what do I hold true about the area of relationships, what do I hold true about the area of work, what do I hold true about the area of my identity, who do I think I am, and more specifically in different contexts, who do I think I am as a brother, as a lover, as a father, as a whatever, because we all have opinions and beliefs about ourselves in those contexts. A super successful business person may be, now I'm going to speak to a specific example but not use names, like the mother of one of my friends, a super successful businesswoman, corporate woman, and just somewhere in her mind, maybe she never realized it consciously, but thought like, I'm a business person, I'm not a mother person, I'm not the type that gives maternal energy. And so one of my friends grew up like in search of that his entire life.
Hmm.
So it was her belief, and there are numerous reasons she had it, but I suspect it was her belief about that role of motherhood that affected her child's life so profoundly. Dude, our beliefs are the making and breaking structures of our world. So I work with people on beliefs and on like restructuring their identity and on getting their minds right so that, they can have happiness and so that they can have success and so that they don't have to experience isolation and meaninglessness and fear and all that on the regular, because you don't.
Wow. So when you say you're a coach, you're more of a life coach, honestly.
Bro, you want to know the secret? So I work with tons of business people,
Mhm.
and behind every business malfunction is a malfunction of the mind. People, they come to me like, oh, I need this new business model and it's not working and this and that, I don't know why. It's like, you've got a challenge with your mental model, not your business model.
And that's
Tony Robbins
affecting your
says this
business
too.
model.
Bro, we are projections of what's going on, of like whatever's in here. There, anyway, many approaches to the nature and theories of reality. But the idea, I talked to an astrophysicist recently. I'm like, hey, what's the biggest thing that you've learned from studying galaxies for your entire professional career? And he's like, that there is no such thing as objective reality. It's subjective reality. So your thoughts rule your world, make the beliefs that you want, and create the universe that you want. Tony Robbins, you mentioned him a couple times. He was not the grand Tony Robbins standing on stages, $100 million in assets a year, whatever, in income a year, whatever. He was once upon a time just some dude. But he built an avatar, he built an identity, and then stepped into it. He literally outlined who this man was going to be and then became it. So you can do that, and so can everybody on this call. Figure out who you want to be in the same way that you'd organize your agenda for the next year. But I think doing it on an identity level is 100 more times important than doing it for your 5-year plans. If you evolve into the next level, like this next level Nick or whomever, like whoever, your life can't help but adapt. If your identity shifts, your behavior shifts. By definition, your thoughts shift.
Wow. No, I think that's personally, I think that's a great place to end it. I really do. That's a very powerful message. Change your beliefs, change your identity, and along with that, you change your life. Talk about a great
Amen.
message. Amen. Thank you so much for getting on this call. I really do appreciate it.
You got it, dude. Godspeed. Good luck.